Hidden beneath the hill where Christ was crucified, ancient texts speak of a secret chamber, the place where the first man, Adam, was buried. But this wasn't just a grave. It was a vault meant to outlast the flood, to preserve relics across the ages, and to reveal a plan connecting Adam, Noah, and Christ in a single divine story. Tonight, we explore one of Christianity's most extraordinary forgotten legends, a tale that transforms our understanding of biblical history from a series of separate events into a unified cosmic drama spanning millennia. This is the story preserved in the Cave of Treasures, a Syriac Christian text that reveals the hidden connections between humanity's first sin and its ultimate redemption. The text tells of a secret chamber hidden beneath the very hill where Christ would die, a chamber that contained not just the bones of the first man, but treasures that would connect every major figure in biblical history. This cave was allegedly discovered by Adam's descendants, used by Noah to preserve humanity's most sacred relics, and ultimately became the foundation upon which the cross of Christ was erected. But this legend is more than just an elaborate story. It represents a particular way of understanding history itself, not as a random sequence of events, but as a carefully designed pattern in which every detail serves a greater purpose. The Cave of Treasures suggests that the same divine intelligence that created the world also orchestrated every moment of human history, ensuring that the solution to humanity's problems would be embedded in the very location where those problems began. What secrets did this legendary cave contain? How did the treasures buried with Adam connect to the gifts brought by the Magi? And why did early Christians believe that understanding this hidden history was essential to comprehending the full meaning of Christ's sacrifice? The Cave of Treasures stands as one of the most remarkable texts in the Syriac Christian tradition, written between the 5th and 6th centuries. The work presents itself not as fiction, but as hidden history, the secret knowledge that was preserved alongside the more familiar biblical accounts. The text's central narrative revolves around a cave discovered shortly after Adam's death by his descendants. According to the legend, this cave was located beneath the mountain that would later be called Golgotha. The choice of location reflected the divine plan that would unfold over the following millennia. When Adam died, his sons were divinely guided to this particular cave, which seemed to have been prepared specifically for this purpose. The cave was not merely a tomb, but a treasure vault, designed to preserve the most sacred relics of humanity's earliest history. The description of Adam's burial is both solemn and mysterious. His body was placed in the cave with great reverence, but more importantly, certain treasures were buried with him: gold, myrrh, and frankincense, the same gifts that would later be brought by the Magi to the infant Christ. Gold represented Christ's kingship, myrrh his priestly function, and frankincense his prophetic role. By placing these items in Adam's tomb, the text suggests that the seeds of humanity's redemption were planted at the very moment of the first death. The cave also contained the garments that had been made for Adam and Eve when they left the Garden of Eden, vestments that bore the glory of paradise, garments that would be worn by the high priests of Israel, and ultimately by Christ himself. Knowledge of the cave and its contents was passed down through the generations of the righteous. Each patriarch became a guardian of these sacred mysteries, creating an unbroken chain of tradition that connected the earliest days of humanity to the time of Christ. The patriarch Enoch, who walked with God, was shown the future history of the world and the role that the cave would play in the plan of salvation. The approaching flood presented a crucial test for the guardians of the cave. Noah was warned not just about the coming destruction, but about the need to preserve the sacred treasures. Noah's preparations thus involved returning to the cave to retrieve the sacred relics. Adam's bones were wrapped in precious cloth. The treasures were secured in specially prepared containers, and the sacred garments were preserved for their future use. The ark carried not just animals and Noah's family, but also the physical links to humanity's origins and its destiny. Without these sacred relics, the post-flood world would have been spiritually impoverished, cut off from its roots in paradise. The climax of the Cave of Treasures narrative comes with Noah's actions after the flood. When the waters receded, Noah was divinely instructed to preserve the sacred relics for the future, understanding that their ultimate purpose had not yet been fulfilled. The most extraordinary element of the legend concerns the ultimate fate of Adam's skull. According to the Cave of Treasures, Noah's descendants carried Adam's skull back to the exact location where it had originally been buried, the hill that would later be called Golgotha. The name itself, meaning place of the skull, was thus not just a description of the hill's shape, but a reference to its sacred contents. The hill of Golgotha was chosen as the site of Christ's crucifixion, precisely because it was the place where Adam was buried, creating a direct physical connection between the first sin and its ultimate remedy. When Christ's blood flowed from the cross, it was said to seep down through the rock and fall upon Adam's skull, literally washing away the stain of the first sin. The treasures that had been buried with Adam also found their destined purpose in this moment. The gold, myrrh, and frankincense that had been preserved through the flood were connected to the gifts brought by the Magi to the infant Christ. The text suggests that these were not just similar offerings, but were actually the same treasures, returned to their rightful owner after millennia of preservation. The sacred garments were also said to have been worn by Christ during his earthly ministry. These clothes, which had been made for Adam and Eve when they left paradise, were restored to their original purity through contact with the sinless Christ. They became the vestments of the new Adam, who would restore what the first Adam had lost. When Christ rose from the dead, Adam's spirit was released from the bondage of death and was among the first to experience the new life that Christ had won. The cave that had been a place of burial became a place of resurrection. The darkness that had preserved the sacred relics was dispelled by the light of the risen Christ. The Cave of Treasures presents a vision of history that is both breathtaking in its scope and challenging in its implications. The text challenges our modern assumptions about the relationship between history and legend, between fact and meaning. In our scientific age, we tend to dismiss such stories as mere mythology, but the Cave of Treasures suggests that these legends may preserve important truths about the nature of reality that purely historical accounts cannot capture. The legend reveals something profound about how early Christians understood the unity of biblical history. Rather than seeing the Old Testament and New Testament as separate dispensations, the Cave of Treasures presents them as a single, unified story in which every element of the earlier narrative points toward and prepares for the later revelation. Whether the Cave of Treasures preserves historical fact or theological fiction, it offers a powerful vision of the unity and purposefulness of history. It suggests that the events of our lives are not random occurrences, but part of a pattern that spans from the beginning of time to the end of days. Every moment is connected to every other moment. Every choice reverberates through the generations, and every ending is also a beginning. A real cave beneath Golgotha? Archaeological evidence is inconclusive, but to the early Christians who preserved this legend, the question of physical reality was less important than the spiritual truth it conveyed. The Cave of Treasures was something more than a historical location. It was a secret chamber beneath history itself, where death and salvation would finally meet. The legend of the cave where Adam was buried challenges us to see history not as a series of disconnected events, but as a unified story in which every detail serves a greater purpose. It invites us to consider that the most important truths may be hidden beneath the surface of visible reality, preserved by faithful guardians until the time comes for their revelation. And it reminds us that even in death, there is the promise of resurrection. Even in endings, there are new beginnings.